Thank you for the introduction to today's seminar talk. I'll be talking about the spectral resolution of the ocean's Lorenz energy cycle. Okay. And eddies are present in every part of the ocean, which is illustrated by the two figures I show here on the you see, does this work? No. On the left, you see results from SSH data, so observations, and on the right, you see relative vorticity in the model which I use. So this already shows that in the model I use, I have these, for my study, important mesoscale features. And we also know that baroclinic instability is the main kinetic energy for these eddies. And yeah, the next important thing to say about an inverse cascade of their kinetic energy, so it fluxes to the larger scales. That is also a robust feature, can be seen in on the left for the North Atlantic, and also in observations of SSH data here on the right. That then raises the question, yeah, what happens to the energy at the larger scales? That needs to be dissipated, it needs to be converted to other energy forms or transported downscale. And yeah, one way to look at ocean energetics, the ocean, is the Lorenz energy cycle, which consists of 4 energy reservoirs: mean, eddy available potential energy, eddy kinetic energy, and yeah, then you have the conversions between them, and also generation and dissipation of these reservoirs. And yeah, this has been analyzed by this paper from von Storch et al. And they found that the baroclinic pathway is the main source of the eddy kinetic energy, going here from mean potential energy to eddy potential energy to eddy kinetic energy. And yeah, what I do then now is to resolve this energy cycle spectrally. Here show the equation for the temporal evolution of eddy kinetic energy, which has then these 4 terms: pressure term, P prime, W prime, and then the all-important baroclinic instability term, W prime, B prime, then the divergence of the spectral flux of eddy kinetic energy, and the term related to barotropic instability here. And yeah, what I then do is I put windows in all over the global domain. For each depth level, I put windows. I choose my windows to be half overlapping. I discard windows with more than 25% of land. And for each window, I perform then the calculation of the terms of the LEC. So I show this here as an example for eddy kinetic energy, first as a function of ky and kx. And then I perform a coordinate transform, collapse the wave number vector to a horizontal one, which you see here on the x-axis. And then you have yeah, the eddy kinetic energy spectrum for one window. And yeah, this I do for every window. And in this talk, I'm going to be talking about the results derived from windows with a size of 128 grid points, which is then roughly 1,000 kilometers. I also repeated the calculation for smaller and larger windows, but I'm not going to talk about this today. Okay, so with this, I can present my results. And here I show yeah, 4 terms. So eddy kinetic energy, then the barotropic instability term, the baroclinic instability term, and the divergence of the spectral flux, all vertically and zonally integrated. So as a function of k here on the x-axis, horizontal wave number vector. So if the largest scales here to the left and the smaller scales to the right, and as a function of latitude on the y-axis. And yeah, first of all, can take a look at eddy kinetic energy, and we see that there are 3 maxima associated to the western boundary currents, Kushio and Gulf current, then equatorial current system, and then the Angulas and the ACC. Here, we can also see that it has a C shape, so eddies get smaller towards the poles. I also compare this here to Rossby radius in green, Rhines scale in blue, and black indicates the scale of maximum EKE. And additionally, I show over k as a function of latitude here on the right, where you can also see these 3 marks. To the conversion terms, so the barotropic conversion term, it's mostly positive, and but it's comparably weak. Then you can also see the inverse cascade here. So yeah, it goes from the smaller scales to the larger scales. So it's a C at the larger scales for EKE. And then most importantly, the baroclinic instability term, where I can see that it is a source of EKE at scales a bit larger than the Rossby radius, which is to be expected. But then the interesting feature is here that it's also a sink for EKE at the larger scales here and here. So there's a dipolar structure of this term with a scale-dependent sign. And yeah, this is at a scale a bit larger than the Rhines scale takes place here. And on this slide, I show now vertical dependence. So on the y-axis, you have z, and on the x-axis, you have horizontal wavenumber vector again. And you can see that here, and here, there's not so much going on. It's more or less over the homogeneous over the water column. But in the baroclinic instability term, you can see that at the surface, it is different than in the interior, and it's stronger in the interior. That's why in the next slides, I want to be talking about the ocean interior and analyze the geographical distribution of the baroclinic instability term, which is why I show here in the upper two panels for a depth of 290 meters, I show average of for the large wave numbers here on the left, and then average for the smaller wave numbers on the right. So basically on the left, you can see that positive baroclinic conversion is strong in the western boundary currents, and then in the ACC and in the Angulas current. And in these regions also, we see the strongest negative baroclinic conversion indicated by this figure here. And then in the lower two panels, I show the average over the same range in K, same wave number. But this time I normalize with the integral of a baroclinic conversion. So basically here on the left, you see, you can see that positive baroclinic conversion takes place everywhere. It's just stronger here in the western boundary currents in ACC, but it takes place everywhere apart from the equator, as you can see here. And interestingly, negative baroclinic conversion doesn't take place everywhere. It is limited to regions poleward of about 30 degrees. In the northern hemisphere, it's a bit more than 30 degrees, and in the southern hemisphere, it's a bit less. And also the equator falls out, but there the dynamics are changed. And so I want to focus on explaining this transition here, basically. So why don't we see negative baroclinic conversion here in this place and also here? And this is what I want to do now, give an explanation for this transition. And for this, I briefly need to talk about eddy scales in the oceans. So on the left paper here by Eden from the year 2000, see on the left the that Equatorward of 30 degrees, the eddy length scales are stretched zonally, meaning that the zonal length scale is larger than the meridional one. And this is not illustrated by this figure, but it's been shown in the paper that the eddy length scale there is proportional to the Rhines scale. And in another paper, it also has been shown that there it's possible to fit linear theory to the observations. That's all for Equatorward of 30 degrees, but if we go to poleward of 30 degrees, we see that the eddy length scales are isotropic, meaning that the zonal length scale roughly matches the meridional one. There, the eddy length scale are more proportional to the Rossby radius, and there it also proves difficult to fit theory to the observations. And this is then why you label these two regimes, the isotropic turbulence regime poleward of 30 degrees and the Equatorward of 30 degrees, because there the length scales are anisotropic, stretched zonally. And the explanation can be found in the theory of Rhines, basically, which says that at the Rhines scale, there is a transfer of turbulent eddy energy to Rossby waves and zonal jets, where there are time and length scale matches. And it can be shown that Equatorward of 30 degrees, this transfer is possible, whereas poleward of 30 degrees, such a transfer is inhibited. And yeah, this basically then explains the distribution of the eddy length scales and the cause for the two regimes. So in the anisotropic turbulent regime Equatorward of 30 degrees, this transfer takes place. And yeah, this is the explanation for that. And what I then did do in my model, I calculated the eddy length scales as well, following the definitions given by the paper I mentioned before. And I can see that here it's this integral length scale, giving them Lx and Ly, which I show here for a depth of 290 meters, so at the peak of baroclinic conversion. And already by comparing these two figures, you can see that in the anisotropic turbulence regime, or closer to the equator, Lx is larger than Ly. And I illustrate this further here by showing here on the left the ratio of Lx over Ly. And yeah, you can see that it gets larger towards the equator. And then I show in blue everything which is larger than this value, which I chose. So basically it is a measure for anisotropy, and I choose this value like this to prove that there exists a value of anisotropy where the distribution is very similar to the one we see for the negative baroclinic conversion. So you can see here and here. Out a bit out of the Atlantic Ocean, maybe, but what you can pretty clearly see is that there's this difference between the northern and the southern hemispheres. So here the transition is at 40 degrees roughly, and here it's more at 20 degrees, which is the same as we see here. And yeah, so we can conclude from this that this anisotropy in eddy length that shows in the model that I use, and the energy transfer between the eddies and zonal jets and the Rossby waves in the anisotropic turbulence regime is likely the explanation for the distribution we see here, because in the anisotropic turbulence regime, the eddy energy is transferred to Rossby waves and zonal jets before it can cascade more up the scale, where then negative baroclinic conversion takes place. Okay, now that I've given this explanation, I want to talk a bit more about the impact of the negative baroclinic conversion, because yeah, it's clearly there in the isotropic turbulence regime. And yeah, what I suggest basically is that there is an energy cycle between the flux of energy in k-space and the baroclinic conversion terms. So basically, baroclinic conversion feeds EKE here at a scale a bit larger than the Rossby radius. Then you have the inverse cascade up the scale. Negative baroclinic conversion converts eddy kinetic energy to eddy available potential energy, which is then expected to have a downward cascade, suggested by a few papers also. And yeah, so energy goes back down the scale, where it's then converted back to eddy kinetic energy by baroclinic instability again. And this then has some implications. So the sink of EKE at the larger scale partly closes the energy budget there. Eddy available potential energy, yeah, if it has the downward cascade, it can then be more easily dissipated. So this maybe opens a pathway to dissipation. And the loop also just traps a certain amount of energy, which circulates in this loop. Yeah, and I want to finish this chapter by saying that the net effect of baroclinic production, of the baroclinic instability term, is still production of EKE. This can be seen here in this integral over k as a function of depth, where you can see that it's positive for each depth. So there's still a surplus of EKE, and that's also illustrated by this plot here, where I've shown the sum of the baroclinic conversion term and the divergence of the energy flux. And yeah, you see it's red, so there's still surplus of EKE, which needs to be converted to other energy forms, dissipated, or transferred down the scale. And yeah, I hope that by continuing this work and by basically resolving the remaining terms of the LEC, especially the potential energies, I can gain more understanding and find answers to these still open questions then. And so with this, I transition more into what I want to do in the future and what I work on at the moment. So basically, you have this kind of traditional view of the Lorenz energy cycle, which I suggest to expand them where here already you can see the suggested energy cycles put in, but you can also see that there are still a lot of question marks, so still a lot of work to do. And basically, this is, there are two difficulties with the diagnostics, like I've done it so far. And the first one is the definition of the available potential energy, which in the classic Lorenz energy cycle is given like this. And this is only first order approximation and depends on n, which is not so easy to define in a realistic global model. So that's a problem. And then the second problem is that there are arguments that the proper way to do your averaging is not on Z levels, like you do it here, and then you get the classic Lorenz energy cycle, like I've shown before, with the baroclinic pathway here from mean kinetic energy to mean potential energy, eddy potential energy, mean potential energy, eddy potential energy, eddy kinetic energy, sorry. But you should rather do isopyramidal thickness weighted averaging to avoid unphysical mixing. And if you do this, then you get changes to your energy cycle as illustrated by these schematics. Maybe the most important one is there's no direct link anymore between mean potential and eddy potential energy, but there's another direct transfer from mean to and this might be the more physical way to do it. But the problem is that it's very complicated in a model which is written in Z levels, like the one I'm using, because then you have to interpolate in the vertical, and that then introduces another error, and so you want to avoid that basically. And so what we suggest to resolve these two problems concerning the availability of the potential energy and the thickness weighted averaging is to use idealized model setups. Most importantly, maybe Z-layered models, where it's more easy to define available potential energy, and where it's also more easy to do the thickness weighted averaging. And so the idea is then to find a setup for a Z-layered model, which features scale-dependent baroclinic conversion terms. So the sink of EKE at the largest scale, that's the important feature. And then compare that to idealized Z-level setups, which then also feature this scale-dependent baroclinic conversion term. And by this comparison, I will be able to estimate the effect of the definition of potential energy and also the thickness-weighted averaging. You could also then interpolate the layered model on Z levels and do both diagnostics in one model also. So this is basically the approach to resolve these two issues, and this is then what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm setting up these idealized setups, and the first idea was to basically replicate the setup used in solution simulations of a beta channel with 3D with turbulence and in a quasi-geostrophic model. And their baroclinic conversion term featured a dipolar structure here, where you have the sink, and here's where it is for two different types of baroclinic instability. That's not so important here because, for both they find the scale-dependent baroclinic production term. So the idea was to use the PyOM model and recreate their setup. So this is what I tried. Snapshots of relative vorticity over F. So there's some eddies, there's some eddy-like features. Also here in the temperature, it's visible, and the jet is basically driven by tilted isopyramidals, which you can see here, which are then restored. So that's the forcing, and I then go ahead and calculate. That's a bit small maybe, but calculate the diagnostic as I've done for the global model. So on the left here, you can see the global integral over EKE as a function of time on the x-axis. So it fluctuates around one value of EKE. So there's some eddy kinetic energy in my model. And then here on the left, in red, that's the Rhines scale as a function of y. And in green, the Rossby radius. So the important thing is that in the jet, the Rhines scale is larger than the Rossby radius, meaning that we should be in the isotropic turbulence regime, where a scale-dependent baroclinic production term then is to be expected. the problem is that it doesn't show up. So here you see the baroclinic production term as a vertical integral as a function of k, and here you see it in the kz plane, and yeah, you see it's only positive, so it's only a source of EKE, and yeah, it's not the sink which I need, which I want to look further into. So yeah, and yeah, additionally also I show EKE, so you have your EKE spectrum. There's also some barotropic instability in that model, and we have the inverse cascade here by the divergence of the spectral flux, which is negative and positive. So that already seems to sort of work, but yeah, the negative term. And I then compared that to my realistic model again. So here in the upper 3 panels, that's EKE, baroclinic conversion, and divergence of the spectral flux in the southern Atlantic. We can see here the sink of EKE in the baroclinic production term. And what I want to point out here is that if you pay attention to these scales, so in red, the Rhines scale, in black, the maximum of EKE, pink's not so important now, and the green is the Rossby radius. And if you compare that to what I have in the idealized setup here, what I showed before, yeah, it looks different. So here the Rhines scale seems to be too large, and the position of the maximum EKE in relative to the other scales also doesn't seem right. So I guess that's the problem. Yeah, so what I did is I tried a couple of different setups where I changed the dissipation, changed the so what I decided to do then is take a step back, go to an easier setup, consider the ED case, which is basically also a channel, this time with beta equal to 0 and constant. And yeah, you have this background flow, which is illustrated by the colors driven by the sloped isopyramidals here. And yeah, also here again, you see eddying features in theta over f and in temperature, and you see your isopyramidals. And I did calculate again my the Lorenz energy cycle terms, and this time what surprised me, what I want to highlight is again the baroclinic instability term here, which now is not positive at all, which is only negative at the larger scales, which is surprising to me because the ED model is a model for baroclinic instability usually, and what I would have expected here is a peak of baroclinic production at the pink scale, which is the scale of maximum ED growth rate. But yeah, I don't find that. So again, more questions than answers, but wanted to show this as this is what I'm working on at the moment. And yeah, oh yeah, basically this is a spin down experiment. So I just initiate the start state and then it's spin down. I also tried to do forcing, and yeah, the result basically, the only change really is that the inverse cascade looks a bit different, or the cascade looks a bit different here. Oops. If you compare these, but again, you have the baroclinic production term only negative, which yeah, I don't really understand, to be honest, why that's happening. And this is what I want to find out now. What's the case? What's happening here? And yeah, this is what I'm working on at the moment. And so far, I think I learned that dissipation seems to be very important, and it's hard to get right because you don't really know what's the correct dissipation. Forcing seems to be seems to be important. I think I'm in the wrong dynamical regime still in terms of Rhines scale, Rossby radius, and maximum of EKE. And yeah, also I'm asking myself why I don't find baroclinic conversion in or positive baroclinic conversion in the ED case. So this is what I'm working on at the moment, and what I want to do in my PhD, which I start next year. And yeah, with this, I arrive at the end of this talk, and thank you for your attention, and I'm open to the questions now then. Thanks.